Oh, they thought words were harmless. Just sound. Just vibration. Something to be ignored, laughed at, drowned out with more noise. But they didn't understand. They didn't see the weight behind your silence. The pressure building behind your breath, until one day you spoke. Once. Not a scream. Not a lecture. Not a plea. Just one statement. Clean, unshaken. Carved into the air like a scar that would never fade. And in that moment, reality tilted. The room didn't just hear you, they shifted around you. Conversations broke mid-sentence. Hands froze halfway through gestures. Even those who pretended not to notice felt the tremor in their bones. Because truth doesn't need volume. Truth doesn't beg. Truth arrives like a storm cloud that doesn't ask permission before it covers the sky. And what you spoke wasn't random. It wasn't casual. It was the culmination of every hour you endured in silence. Every time you held back when they wanted you loud. Every moment you chose observation over reaction. That single line carried the weight of restraint, the sharpness of patience, the steel of self-control. They thought they were ready for it. They weren't. Whispers broke out first. Did you hear that? Did they mean it? They clung to each other, trying to spin it, twist it, laugh it off. But the echo didn't fade. It lingered. It bent conversations. It made the air taste different. That's the thing about presence. Once it's undeniable, no noise can cover it. And here's the part they can't admit. They felt it, not in their ears, in their rhythm, in their pulse. Your words adjusted their breathing without them realizing it. Their heartbeat matched the weight of your tone. For the first time, their carefully built illusions cracked. Not because you tore them down, but because reality itself aligned with you. They always thought control came from volume, from authority, from repetition. But no, real control comes from inevitability, and inevitability doesn't shout. It speaks once, and the world rearranges itself to fit. That's what you did. You didn't argue. You didn't fight. You didn't scramble. You simply spoke, and the ground tilted. Now they replay it in their minds, again and again, trying to find the weakness, trying to convince themselves it was luck, a fluke, an accident. But deep down, they know better. Deep down, they feel it crawling into their plans, threading into their thoughts, dismantling every scheme they thought would hold. That's why they shake now. Not because you promised anything, not because you threatened, but because they've seen what happens when someone speaks with gravity instead of noise, when someone lets silence do the sharpening before a single word cuts through. And the irony? You only spoke once. Once. And already, their world bends around it. They call it coincidence. They call it timing. They call it anything but what it is, power. Because if they admit it, if they name it for what it is, they'll have to face the truth. Reality shifted when you spoke. One sentence and the atmosphere bent. The lights didn't flicker, but people swore the shadows deepened. The walls didn't move, but the room felt smaller. That's what presence does. It doesn't knock on the door. It rearranges the house while they're still standing inside. And now, everywhere you go, echoes follow. They try to pretend it's nothing. They keep their faces calm, their voices steady. But watch their hands. Watch the way fingers fidget. Pens drop. Glasses tremble ever so slightly when you enter. They'll never admit it out loud, but their bodies confess the truth. Your words didn't end when you stopped speaking. They're still unraveling inside them. Because words like yours don't fade. They dig, they carve, they sit in the back of the mind like a seed that refuses to die. They water it with their doubts. They feed it with their fears. And before long, it grows into something they can't control. That's the genius of it. You didn't need to say more. You didn't need to argue, explain, or shout. You let them build your presence for you, brick by brick, inside their own imaginations. And here's the twist. They don't even fear you for what you said. They fear you for what you didn't. They lie awake at night, staring at ceilings, replaying that one sentence and trying to decipher the rest of the story. What else do you know? What else could you say? What else are you holding back? That's the cruelty of silence. It doesn't give them answers. It gives them questions. And questions are heavier than threats, because threats can be measured, weighed, prepared for. But silence makes them invent the worst possibilities. Silence forces them to confront their own cracks. You spoke once, and now every whisper in their mind belongs to you. Every plan they make, they imagine your response. Every step they take, they check the ground, wondering if it's already tilted against them. They can't escape it. They can't ignore it. And the more they try to bury it, the louder it echoes. Here's the truth they choke on. They built their lives on repetition. Repeat a lie enough times, it becomes belief. Repeat a command enough times, it becomes obedience. But your presence shattered that cycle. You didn't need to repeat. You didn't need to convince. You spoke once, and that was enough. That's why they're restless now. That's why their laughter feels hollow. Their speeches feel weak. Their plans feel flimsy. They know that even if they pile noise on top of noise, it won't drown out the resonance of that single moment. And so they whisper, not about the world, not about their power, not about their illusions. They whisper about you, the one who didn't need an army, the one who didn't need a throne, the one who didn't need permission to speak. Because when reality bends to a single word, no empire feels safe. You see it in their eyes now, the hesitation, the cracks. They step into the room rehearsed, polished, armored in confidence. But the second your presence settles in, the armor rattles. They stumble over words they've said 1,000 times before. They repeat themselves, not because they're making a point, but because they're buying time. Time to figure out how to stand against someone who doesn't even raise a hand. And that's the riddle that gnaws at them. How do you fight what doesn't fight back? How do you outplay someone who isn't even playing? They built their empire on reaction. Push, and people push back. Accuse, and people defend. Corner, and people struggle. But you rewrote the script. You don't react. You don't scramble. You don't explain. You let the silence do the cutting. That's why their meetings end differently now. Once they planned for the future with arrogance. Now they sit hunched over tables, sketching strategies with shaky pens, every arrow pointing toward one word, you. You've become the axis around which their paranoia spins. They can't move without thinking of you. They can't breathe without calculating the angle of your silence. And the cruelest part, you didn't ask for this. You didn't chase it. You didn't beg to be the center of their thoughts. You became it simply by existing in your truest form. They wanted noise. You gave stillness. They wanted chaos. You gave calm. They wanted to box you in. And instead, you erased the box itself. Now even their victories taste sour. They win an argument, but it feels hollow. They secure a deal, but the ink dries cold. Because in the back of their minds, a whisper lingers. What does it matter if he's still standing? What does it mean if she's still silent? And here's the revelation they'll never admit out loud. Your silence doesn't just unsettle them, it redefines them. They've spent their lives drawing power from others, from reactions, from obedience, from applause, but you refuse to give them that fuel. You starve their system, and in that starvation, their power crumbles. By the time they realize it, it's already too late. The doubt has spread. The whispers have multiplied. The cracks in their empire are visible to everyone now. Their allies glance at them differently. Their followers hesitate before clapping. Their loyal soldiers begin to wonder if loyalty is misplaced. And all it took was one word, one presence, one silence that wouldn't bend. That's the paradox they can't solve. They tried to contain you with rules, but you became ruleless. They tried to control you with fear, but you became fearless. They tried to bury you in noise, but you became the silence that echoes louder than any shout. So now every time you walk in, every time your name crosses their lips, the question grows heavier. If one word bent reality this far, what happens when you speak again? The truth is, they're not just afraid of you. They're afraid of the reflection you force them to see. Every time your presence cuts through the room, they're reminded of their own weakness, their borrowed power, their fragile crowns, their hollow speeches. You didn't just bend reality, you revealed it, and reality has never been kind to those who build castles out of sand. They whisper now, but it's not strategy anymore. It's survival. What if he speaks again? What if she doesn't stop this time? They rehearse counters to words you haven't even said. They write defenses against moves you haven't even made. They plan for storms that only exist in their imagination. And here's the irony. In trying to prepare for you, they prepare their own downfall. Because while they waste hours scripting answers to questions you never asked, you keep moving forward. You don't slow down to meet them in the battlefield they invented. You walk straight past it, and in that gap, in that blind spot, their empire begins to rot. They thought bending reality was impossible. They thought words were fragile things, tossed like feathers in the wind. But you proved them wrong. You spoke once, and the ground beneath their feet shifted. Now they can't trust the earth itself. They can't trust the laws they once swore by. They can't even trust the sound of their own voices. Because every echo reminds them of yours. You didn't need fire. You didn't need armies. You didn't need the approval of the crowd. You had something rarer, something they couldn't purchase or steal. Alignment. Every part of you, your silence, your stillness, your patience, your words, moved in one direction. No wasted motion, no scattered energy. A storm disguised as calm, and the world noticed. The ones who once mocked you, they sit quiet now, waiting for the next syllable to drop. The ones who tried to break you, they've become case studies in their own destruction. The ones who doubted you, they repeat your phrases in secret, pretending they thought of them first. But you don't chase credit. You don't chase applause. You let reality itself be your evidence, and reality does not lie. Reality bent, and it did not bend back. The cruelest wound you inflicted wasn't visible. It wasn't fire or steel or scars. It was permanence. You didn't just break their control for a moment. You rewrote the ground rules of the game. You bent the rules until they snapped. And when they did, everyone saw the truth. The rules were never real to begin with. And here's what terrifies them most. You haven't spoken again. Not yet. That single word, that single moment, still echoes loud enough to dismantle their certainty day after day. They ask themselves, if one word did this, what happens when the second word arrives? Or the third? So they wait. They tremble. They whisper. Not because they believe you're coming for them, but because they know you don't have to. The silence stretches, and yet it speaks louder than their loudest declarations. You don't need to repeat yourself. Once was enough. Once was the crack in the wall, the fracture in the mask, the tremor beneath the floor they thought was solid. They scramble now. You can see it. Their steps are uneven. Their voices quiver even when they try to shout. They paper over the cracks with more rules, more speeches, more empty promises, but none of it sticks. Because every action they take now is reaction. Every move they make begins with you. They wanted to believe they were the center. They wanted to believe their empire spun because of their own brilliance. But your single word proved the opposite. They were never the axis. You were. You bent reality once, and now every orbit belongs to you. The proof is in the people. The crowd that once doubted, once mocked, now listens differently. They tilt their heads when you enter. They hold their breath, as if waiting for lightning to strike. And it doesn't matter if you speak or if you stay silent, because either way, the air thickens. Either way, they can't look away. And here's what gnaws at them. It wasn't supposed to be you, not the outsider, not the one they dismissed, not the quiet presence they thought they could ignore. In their story, you were a background character at best, but you tore their script in half. And now your presence is the headline. They call meetings in dark rooms, whispering strategies about how to reclaim the narrative. They think if they push louder, if they shout longer, if they flood the air with noise, maybe, just maybe, they can drown out your single word. But noise cannot erase truth. And truth once spoken echoes forever. The weight of that truth hangs heavy on them. It breaks their posture. It eats at their confidence. The ones who once strutted with unshakable pride now shuffle, avoiding eye contact. They can't admit it aloud, but every corner of their being knows. You broke something they cannot fix. And you don't chase them. You don't need to. That's the beauty of this power. You didn't build your strength on fragile scaffolding like they did. You built it on stillness, on discipline, on patience. They run themselves ragged, trying to patch holes in a sinking ship, while you stand steady on the shore, watching the tide do its work. Here's the lesson they'll never confess. Reality doesn't bend for titles. It doesn't bend for crowns. It doesn't bend for noise. It bends for alignment. For the one who speaks from a place deeper than fear, deeper than ego. You found that place, and once you did, reality had no choice but to move. They know now. They know they can't undo it. Even if they silence your voice, the echo remains. Even if they erase your name, the impact stands. Even if they try to rebuild the table, the world will remember that it was you who shattered it. And so, they live in fear, not of what you'll do next, but of what you've already done. Because once reality bends, it never returns to its old shape. And then comes the unraveling. Not in an explosion, not in some cinematic showdown, but in the quiet corners of their empire. The cracks widen, the glue that held them together, fear, control, illusion, begins to dissolve. First, it's a glance across the table that lingers too long. Suspicion. Then, a whisper that doesn't quite sound like loyalty. Paranoia. Then, a chair left empty, a meeting cut short, a plan abandoned halfway, collapse. They try to hold the pieces, but their hands are shaking. They try to force unity, but their words betray them. You can see it. Their empire is rotting from the inside, and all you had to do was speak once. That word became the fault line. That word became the virus. That word turned their fortress into dust. And here's the part that drives them insane. It wasn't a threat. You didn't storm their gates. You didn't smash their walls. You didn't even raise your hand. You simply spoke. Once. And reality bent. Not because you forced it, but because you aligned with it. Now their own people are turning restless. Some whisper your name with respect, others with fear. But either way, it's on their lips. No decree can erase it. No punishment can silence it. They tried to bury you in noise, but you became the silence that swallowed them whole. They don't want to admit it, but their entire identity is now measured against you. When they plan, they think, what if he sees this? When they speak, they wonder, what if she's listening? Their every action is tethered to your presence, whether you're in the room or not. That's not just influence, that's domination. And you don't rush, you don't gloat, you don't demand recognition. You've already won by not needing it. That's the blade they can't defend against. Your refusal to play their game. Because their power relied on reactions, on dragging people into their storm. But you refused. You stayed still. And in that stillness, their storm tore itself apart. Piece by piece, their empire becomes unrecognizable. Maps torn, alliances fractured, voices raised, then silenced in shame. The same men who once swore loyalty are now accusing each other of weakness. Betrayal, hesitation, fear turns to paranoia. Paranoia turns to chaos. Chaos turns to ruin. And all the while, your presence looms. Not loud, not violent, but undeniable. They begin to realize the truth. The real war was never between you and them. The real war was inside them, and your single word lit the battlefield. Here's the twist that history will carve deep. When they fell, it wasn't because you destroyed them. It was because you revealed them. You showed the world what they truly were. Fragile, brittle, desperate. Their empire didn't collapse under your attack. It collapsed under its own weight. Once the illusion was broken, the whispers spread. At first they're quiet, like sparks flickering in the dark. But sparks don't stay small for long. They ignite, and soon, your story isn't a secret. It's a current running through every hallway, every alley, every crowded room. They say, he spoke once and the room bent. They say, she didn't lift a hand, yet the walls collapsed. They say, when silence fell, it wasn't emptiness, it was his presence. And just like that, you stop being a rumor and start becoming a legend. People no longer measure power by crowns or thrones. They measure it by you, by the way one word out of your mouth made empires tremble, by the way your calm became sharper than any weapon they could forge, by the way your silence made the loudest noise. This is how history works. It doesn't cling to the ones who scream the loudest, or the ones who command the most soldiers. It clings to the ones who shift the axis of belief. And that's what you did, without asking, without begging, without forcing. You shifted belief. You proved presence itself could bend reality. And here's the irony. You never set out to be their story. You never asked for recognition, never demanded to be written in their books. But history doesn't care about intention. It only remembers impact. And your impact? Carved deeper than stone, heavier than iron, impossible to erase. While they scatter, while they scramble to rebuild, the people outside watch. They see an empire fall not because of a war, but because of one voice. They see chaos dissolve, not because of rebellion, but because of stillness. And they believe again, not in crowns, not in titles, not in false order, but in presence, in discipline, in silence that shakes the ground more than thunder ever could. That's the twist they never saw coming. You didn't just survive their storm, you redefined it. Now when they gather, they don't sit united. They sit fractured, each one wondering who among them secretly respects you, who secretly fears you, who secretly hopes to stand where you stand. Suspicion spreads like fire. Trust turns to ash, and while they burn, your story grows. The table they once fought to keep you away from, it doesn't exist anymore. The empire they swore was untouchable, dust, and yet you remain. The whispers that mocked you now sound like hymns. The names that doubted you choke on their regret. The same mouths that once dismissed you now can't speak without invoking you. And here's the part that cements your place forever. You didn't need them to see you. You only needed to see yourself. Once you embraced what you became, once you accepted that your silence was not weakness but mastery, you transcended their game. That's why no one can stop you now. Because power built on fear crumbles. Power built on illusion fades. But power built on truth, on presence, on discipline, on becoming unshakable, that endures. So let them whisper. Let them tremble. Because whispers turn to echoes, and echoes turn to legends. And long after their names are forgotten, yours will remain. Not loud, not desperate, just undeniable. That's the cruelest truth for them. And the greatest truth for you? They tried to erase you, and instead, they immortalized you. And then, it settles. The noise, the chaos, the scrambling for control, it all fades into silence. The empire that once mocked you, doubted you, tried to cage you, now exists only as a memory. Broken chairs, empty halls, names no one remembers. But you remain, not because you fought harder, not because you shouted louder, not because you played their game better. You remain because you refused to play their game at all. You wrote your own. That's the piece they'll never understand. They thought strength meant domination. They thought power meant control. They thought victory meant crushing someone under your boot. But your strength was never in force. It was in presence, in discipline, in silence that bent the air, in a single word that could tilt reality itself. The world watches now, not in fear, not in blind worship, but in awe. They see a figure who never needed to scream to be heard, who never needed to threaten to command respect. A figure who spoke once and made the ground shift forever. And here's the twist they'll never admit. You didn't just defeat them, you transcended them. You showed the world that survival isn't about being louder than the noise. It's about being still enough that the noise destroys itself. You didn't burn their empire. You let them set fire to themselves. You didn't chase their whispers. You let them echo until the walls collapsed. You didn't take their crowns. You made them meaningless. That's why your story endures, because you are not remembered for what you tore down. You are remembered for what you became. And what did you become? The storm they couldn't prepare for, the silence they couldn't manipulate, the presence they couldn't ignore. You became the measure against which all others are weighed. So now, when they speak of power, they don't mention titles, armies, or gold. They mention you, the one who shifted rooms without trying, the one who broke systems without lifting a hand, the one who bent reality with a single word. And here's the lesson the world carries from you. True power doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It doesn't announce itself. True power stands, steady, silent, and the world bends around it. That's your legacy. Not crowns, not thrones, not monuments built by trembling hands. Your legacy is presence itself, etched into time, woven into whispers, carried like a shadow no one can outrun. So let them scatter. Let them fade. Let their names vanish in the dust. Because long after the noise dies, long after the empires crumble, long after the tables rot away, you will remain. Not as a ruler, not as a tyrant, not as a ghost, but as the undeniable proof that silence is louder than chaos, that presence is stronger than force, that truth is heavier than lies. You spoke it once, and reality bent, and now the world will never stand the same again.